Hi, hello there. Welcome to Booktopia TV. My name's Anna Downs. I'm the author of The Safe Place, and I am absolutely delighted to be here talking today to the very, very lovely Loraine Peck, whose debut novel, The Second Son, came out with Text Publishing earlier last month. Loraine, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Anna. Lovely to be here on Booktopia TV. Thanks for having me.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Booktopia. All right, so I am particularly pleased to be chatting to you today because I had the great honour of launching your book, which was fantastic. We had a really lovely night, but it felt really personal, and I didn't get much of an opportunity to talk about the book itself. We kind of, the emphasis was very much on you, and it was gorgeous. There were all your friends and family in the room, but this is so good because I get to talk today about the book, which I completely loved. Congratulations again on publication. Why don't you kick off by, just for anybody that hasn't read it or doesn't know about it, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the story?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. And thank you in so many ways, because you were the very first author to review the book. And you give me the perfect way in, the perfect kind of shortcut for anyone who hasn't read the book, because part of your review mentioned that it was The Second Son was a modern day Godfather, and that's a kind of really easy emotional hook for everyone out there. If you enjoy books about crime families, then you'll probably enjoy The Second Son, or I hope you will. It's about a Croatian crime family working on the streets of Sydney, and the eldest son, the first son, is gunned down in the street outside when he's putting his bins out. And the second son, the titular second son, Johnny Novak, has to step up. His father, Milan, who is the godfather of the Croatian gang, wants him to seek revenge. And Johnny Novak is very torn between his duty to his crime family and his duty to his own family, his wife and child. And the story is told from the point of view of Johnny, who's kind of all action, and Amy Novak, his wife, who's a nice middle-class Aussie chick who just happened to marry a gangster. And she's carrying a dark secret.
Brilliant. Very well pitched. You've obviously had a lot of practice over the last few weeks. So, I mean, a lot has been made of, the violence in this book and the gang warfare. And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit later. But I think that, following the events of this week and the phenomenal marches for justice across Australia, protesting against gendered violence and the sexual assault and abuse of women, I thought it'd be really appropriate and topical for us to kick off with the female characters of the book, who I think have just that little bit more agency and strength and power than you might find usually in this kind of book. So can you talk to us a little bit about Amy and Branka?
Amy and Branka, they look, being part of a Croatian crime family means that you're working within a patriarchal society with, a whole lot of toxic alpha male masculinity thrown in. And I think Branka, Johnny's mum, and Milan's wife, sort of starts out in a relatively submissive position. Her eldest son has just died, and when she is sad, she cooks, and she shows love by cooking. So she's a very nurturing presence. And it's only until around halfway through the book when she runs out of patience with the whole situation, and very much so with her husband. And instead of clearing the table and going back to the kitchen, she sits down, she drinks a shot of rakia, and she says, no, Milan, your business, it took one of my sons already. You will not take my last son.
That's one of my favorite scenes, that one. She's brilliant. Yeah.
And then she she kind of quietly takes control of what happens next. And Amy is, as I mentioned, she's a nice middle-class Aussie chick, and she's been kind of had her head in the sand. She's been very naive about being married to a gangster because Johnny's really kept her away from the sordid side of the business. And when she's confronted with the escalating violence, she has to make a bunch of decisions herself. Will she stay? Will she leave? Will she run away and disappear with their 10-year-old son, Sasha, to protect him? And instead, she discovers a whole lot of hidden strengths that she didn't realize she had. So again, she goes, her character is on a journey of discovery into her own courage, I guess you could say. And so the women start to quietly lead from the front.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way of describing it. And I think particularly the way in which they do slowly step forward in this male-dominated community is really well done and very believable. And I think you do, you know, as a female reader, you definitely come away with a sense of, oh, thank God for that. Okay, good, you know. And, you know, the other thing that the women do in the book, particularly Amy, is I think beneath the layers of violence and aggression, you know, you could say that this book is a love story, couldn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was
as a love story.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I bet you do. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the relationship between Amy and Johnny, and what exactly, you know, what were you trying to explore with their relationship and their love for one another and the journey that they go on, particularly, you know, the arc of their relationship? Yeah,
I wanted to explore how a marriage copes with a whole lot of external pressures, and how, as you've got to maintain your individuality, you've got to understand what's needed of you by others, and everyone has their loyalties torn between their partner and their family at times, and being involved, being that this is all about a crime family, that is much heightened, and it's heightened by the escalation of things going wrong, because you know, that's what a crime story is all about. I actually wanted to write an action thriller, and when I first wrote this book, the very first draft was, it was told from Johnny's point of view, in third person, in past tense. And it really was very much an action thriller, but my female characters were cardboard, and I wrote one scene from Amy's point of view. It's the scene where she meets Johnny and they go to Croatia, and it's still in the book. It was just an exercise trying to get under her skin, but she really came to life for me, and then she kind of took over half the book. And I'm really grateful I tried that, and it was at the suggestion of one of the fellow students in the Curtis Brown course that I took, that I do that, and it was really useful to me, because it is an exploration of a kind of he said, she said novel, that and which one of these two narrators is the reliable one, you know, we don't really know, but I think that sort of relationship is always fascinating, and it has to come down to love in the end, because if there's no love, there is no motivation to change, to grow, to adapt, to try harder, to put someone else before you, to put someone else, to give someone else power over you, or to take that power back. and that's kind of the cycle I was interested in exploring when it came to their relationship.
Yeah. And I think it also, you need that emotional color, don't you? You need that emotional flavor in order to be fully invested in their journey. And I think as well, their love story on a more sort of perhaps ordinary day-to-day level, it's very, it very much resonates with those of us who are married. And I think, the in-law relationship is kind of universally a little bit of a tricky one. And I think, this book really explores that well and nails Amy's discomfort in, her absolute willingness to jump into this new family, and her determination to be part of the family. But there's also that kind of, she's always slightly on the outside. They have embraced her, but she's desperately trying to live her life as part of a family that she was not born into, and a community that she was not born into. And I think that's something that a lot of people can really relate to. Can you relate to that?
Oh, yeah. As it happens, I'm married to a Croatian, and he has a big family, and they are very, very different from my family. I have a small family. We're all kind of really sweet to each other. We're loving, and we communicate in a very kind of normal way. And getting to know Stead's family, my husband's family, they're a big family. They're sort of loud. They like to drink shots, and they like to cook, and they like to gather together and spend time with each other. But they're also kind of they can be really hard on each other. They can take the piss. They can really just kind of they show love for each other by kind of giving each other a bit of a hard time. That's a way of showing love, right? It's a way of showing you're accepted. And when that was sort of first coming at me, I was like, whoa, what's going on here? That they're very loving, just in a different kind of way. And it took me a while to feel accepted. And it's just one of those things. Everyone understands what it's like. To have to deal with a family that's very different from your own. I mean, we all face that same challenge, I'm sure, at some point.
Yeah. I think it is just a really challenging, tricky thing to love a family that isn't yours, isn't your own, and be loved by them in return. It is a really hard thing to do, and I think that's one of the aspects of the book that I really enjoyed, and that I was most looking forward to talking to you about, is because you've really drawn this world very, very deftly and very well, and the Croatian Australian community is not one that I've seen before, either personally or in literature. And so that was really interesting to me. And the food and the cultural traditions, and you've got some of the language in there, and it is what made you want to particularly dive into that world, other than it being sort of on hand?
Yes.
What about that community fascinates you?
I grew up on the northern beaches, not the western suburbs where the book is set. I grew up on the northern beaches, and we had a lot of Yugoslavs at my high school particularly. And they were all Yugoslavs back then. We're talking about in the 70s here. And I didn't know which one of them was Serbian or Croatian or Bosnian or Slovenian or any of the other Yugoslav states or parts of the country as it was back then. And it wasn't until the 90s that it became obvious that with the Civil War that a lot of these peoples did not get on. And I think it was the first time I'd ever really seen people who looked just like us on TV at war with each other. It really impacted me because I could see how it was impacting the Croatian and Serbians back here in Australia, because there were riots at soccer games and outside Yugoslav clubs that were split in two and all that sort of thing. And it really kind of shocked me that you can move around the world as far away as possible from your old country and just take all that centuries of pain with you and pass it on to the next generation. And we've seen that time and time again over the years here in Australia, because we do, we have had a huge influx of migrants, and they've added enormous amount to our quality of life here and Australian culture. And but it's just interesting that everyone takes stuff with them. You can't leave yourself behind, can you?
No, you can't. And I'm very fascinated by that. I mean, I've personally had a very privileged upbringing. I haven't been touched by war, but similarly, I was aware of it as a growing up as a child, and I am really fascinated by that thing that you talk about, that people are bringing it with them wherever they go. They take it and it becomes part of the younger generation's narrative. It's so passed on to them that it never really, it's not diluted as you think it might be.
Yeah.
And that almost, that war plays out in Parramatta. And as you said, like it's so far removed from Croatia and Serbia, but yet it's there. It's in Parramatta and it's still happening.
Yeah.
And I think that element of the inheritance of war and the inheritance of violence and what that does to families, and how that narrative, it's so difficult to break a narrative, isn't it?
Absolutely. And obviously when you're writing a crime thriller / action thriller / psychological thriller / murder mystery, you've got to create opponents and antagonists for your protagonists, your main characters, to bash up against. And because I had a Croatian crime family, obviously we had to have a Serbian crime family who would become the natural opponents. Whether or not they're the real opponents is to be seen or read when you read the book. But there are a lot of other gangs involved as well. And gang warfare in Sydney is rife. I remember talking to police in Liverpool, where a lot of the rivalry plays out about whether or not Croatian and Serbian gangs were still considered a problem. And the guy I was talking to said, "Oh yeah." So it is all still happening. We hear about drive-bys, etc., all the time still. And when something like that happens in your, in Amy's world, in her nice kind of middle-class world, where she has essentially assumed that, she's safe because she's been told, look, women and children are safe. The gangs never cross the line and start targeting women and children. I mean, that is, we're talking about, I think one of the reasons that people are so fascinated by crime families is they're kind of just like us. They just have a slightly different code of ethics. And they're willing to win.
You've segued right into my next question about crime families. I was just going to say, why do you think we are so fascinated with crime families?
Yeah, because they're really fun to watch, because they are just like us, but they're willing to go outside the law, outside our own code of ethics to achieve their aims. They're willing to win at any cost. And a lot of what happens within organised crime and within gangs is, there's definitely a hierarchy. There is a code of conduct. There is a way of being. There is a way up through the ranks, and woe betide you if you work outside that, because gangs are very tribal. Organised crime is very organised. The people that run crime families, successful ones obviously, could run big corporations. They just choose to run their business outside the law. They're outliers, and we find that fascinating because we all kind of wish we didn't have those constraints, but somehow we just do, because the way we've been brought up and the way we want society to work, and they're willing to just go outside that. But a lot of what happens within the second son is actually implied violence, and that's the way organised crime works. It's all about implied violence. If you actually have to knock someone off, you've kind of failed in your mission, because
it's interesting.
All about intimidation.
Yeah.
All about, having your bit of turf and protecting it, and protection being the operative word, being how you keep everyone in line. They are in line, which means they are protected. The minute they step outside the wire, they are no longer protected, and it's anyone's game. So when one of the gangs brings the war home and it affects Amy and Sasha, then the code of conduct has been broken, and the whole Croatian gang, gathered together out on the back patio at the Godfather's place, at Milan's place, like, how can this happen? Why are they targeting, our women and children? It's not how it works.
Yeah.
And that sort of spins the story around again.
Yeah, and I think that point that you make about our feelings and our own simmering tensions within our own families and stuff being played out in a very kind of on a field that's just not ours, and people making decisions that we could never make because they're we're constrained in a way that they're not. Like, that's really, I think that's so prevalent right now as well. I don't know about you, I'm really enjoying Yellowstone at the moment, which is a kind of a very similar thing. The Dutton family are very similar to the Novaks in terms of what they want and how they relate to one another, and that whole protection thing, and you'll do anything for the family. And of course we would all do anything for our families, wouldn't we? And if we do feel threatened, of course we might play out little kind of macabre fantasies in our head, but we would never ever actually do anything about it. So yeah, like
you wouldn't reach for the gun.
Well, I mean, personally, no, I would never do that. So
it depends on how you've been brought up. If you've been brought up to absolutely know that, excuse me, violence is the answer. It's the first answer. It's the last answer. Violence is the answer, and that's the way Johnny Novak was brought up.
Yeah,
so,
and you can see the way that he's affected by that, how that's filtered through from his parents to him, but then how that is then filtered down to his son, and how that's playing out in the next generation. And I mean, I wouldn't want to throw out any spoilers at this point, but I think that Johnny and Amy's relationship, but also the relationship with their son and what happens to him, and how it's very reminiscent of, for example, The Godfather and other gang family, crime family stories. But there's something a bit different about it as well that I think is very modern, and that really plays into our sort of contemporary retelling or reinterpretation of those stories.
Yeah, exactly. One of the prime motivators for Johnny throughout the book is that there's a family tradition. You have to learn how to use all the guns in the family arsenal at the age of 12, right? You're not allowed to play with guns until you're 12. And then it's open slather. You'll be taken out into the bush. You'll be taught how to steal cars. You'll be taught how to rob a grocery store or, a petrol station or whatever. Well, certainly that was Johnny's experience. And his elder brother Ivan's experience, the one who was murdered. And what Johnny desperately doesn't want to happen is that Sasha, his son, who's 10, has to learn how to use a gun. And for him, that's a prime motivator to get out. But when you're born into a crime family, how do you get out? Especially when you've been tasked with seeking revenge and you can't let your family down. You can't let your father down because you've always sought his approval, and his approval's always been given to your elder brother but never given to you, and you want that approval. And, it's really motivating. But on the other hand, you're torn because you don't want your son Sasha to end up like you, knowing that crime is the only thing you can do. It's the only thing you've ever been taught to do. And, Johnny's dyslexic, and he's a savant with a spreadsheet, which is why he's in charge of laundering the money. But he's also, his father's son. He is a naturally intimidating person, and he has that kind of gravitas. And watching Sasha respond to some of the situations he finds himself in, it's like, oh my God, that blood is running thickly through his veins. Meanwhile, Amy desperately doesn't want Sasha to grow up and become a criminal just like his father. And that's one of the reasons she threatens to run and disappear, and Johnny will never see them both again. So, he's this ultimatum is coming at him, and, which way will he turn? So, yeah, as I'm writing the sequel now, it's interesting to see how Sasha's character is developing. Where's that going to go?
Oh, I'm really looking forward to that. Can you tell us anything about the kind of journey that you want to take them on? Or I guess you can't really, for risk of spoilers.
But giving away too much. Yeah. Other than I can just say, you can run, but you can never escape your family, can you?
Dun, dun, dun. That's amazing. One last thing before we wrap up.
I need to ask you a couple of questions first.
Oh, well.
Come on.
Well, come on. All right. Well, just one last question. When we spoke just before your launch, you told me a really funny thing about I was asking about the food and the kind of those family scenes in the second son where everybody's around the table and everybody's eating, and what an important thing, particularly for Branca, food is. And there are some very specific cultural dishes that come out. How's that been for you in your personal experience? Because with the language as well, haven't you've kind of tripped over a few times with kind of the food and pronunciation and stuff?
Yeah, I the reason that one of the most important dishes in the book, which is called blitva, is I use the word blitva, it's basically spinach and potatoes, right? And then you just boil it with any other green vegetable you have in the fridge, and then olive oil, lemon juice, salt and pepper. It's delicious, right? Very simple, but it's basically the vegetable dish that's always served. And the Croatian family call it the color green. They just call it zeo. Now, I have said that wrongly because I cannot say it. And every time I try and say it, they all laugh at me. So I use blitva, which is how it's described in a restaurant menu if you're in Croatia. Okay, fine. But it's not the word they use, because every time I use that word, they laugh at me. But now all of my friends and I'm even getting some comments from readers are having blitva competitions.
Brilliant. Blitva. Oh, that's brilliant.
And my husband will always say that would be him. He's the best blitva maker, and he's pretty good, I have to admit. Yeah.
That's excellent. No,
Okay,
I love those scenes with all the food and all the family around the table, and it's so evocative.
And that's what they do. You know, they gather around, they eat, they sing badly, drink lots of rakia, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, you know, as long as someone doesn't pull out a gun, it sounds great.
Exactly. Luckily for me, Stead's family are not criminals, and so we don't have to deal with that. Now, I want to ask you a couple of questions about The Safe Place. I loved this book. I just thought it was such an interesting premise, and the twist completely floored me. I was gobsmacked by it, and I loved the way you just dropped little crumbs for me to follow, little breadcrumbs for me to follow, so that when, you know, I got to that point where the resolution, where the reveal, sorry, I wasn't blindsided by it. I was like, right, now I get it. And I think that's an incredible art. So the question to you is, I know that you were on a job in a similar kind of place, off grid on the French coastline, and that's where you met your husband, or you were there together, or tell me that story. Tell us that.
The Safe Place, for anybody that doesn't know, is about a young woman who accepts a job working for and living with a very wealthy family on their huge property on the west coast of France. And it's very isolated. It's not completely off grid, but it certainly feels that way to the protagonist. And it is based on my own experience. I did work as a housekeeper / caretaker with my husband. We'd actually met about 6 months before we accepted that job. We met doing a ski season together in France. We worked for this chalet company. He's a primary school teacher, so he was running the creche, and I was, at the time, I was working as a massage therapist, so and I was managing the chalet and mountain guiding and doing all sorts of things. And there was a family there who they were our guests, and when they realized that we were a couple, they offered us this job. They said, look, we've got this great big house and we like to, you know, summer there, but it's so big, we need somebody to come and help us take care of it. And so, you know, when our guests arrive, all the sheets are washed and everything's clean, and and we also, part of our job was to go into the local villages and go and buy up all the food. She was actually a trained chef, so she taught me to cook. And so there are lots and lots of those experiences that found their way into that book.
But did you ever feel like you were in danger there?
No, not in. I mean, the family were absolutely amazing. Let me just be really clear about that. They were just beautiful, warm, lovely people, and we're still friends. And there was nothing sinister that happened per se, but I think the inspiration for the story came from the isolation of the property, but also how gloriously kind of opulent it felt to me. To them, not so much. You know, I remember sitting at dinner with them and them talking about some people that they knew and their lifestyle. And they were like, oh, it's a different world, isn't it? You know, gosh, can you imagine living like that? And I was like, what? Like, so it was more about sort of finding your place in a strange world and figuring out who you are, and you know, that thematically that sense of not knowing where you belong and not knowing who you are. So no, never felt in danger at the property per se. Again, it was very isolated. It was right on the ocean, and we had ocean on one side and we had forest on the other. And there were times when the family weren't there and it was just Matt and I. And, you know, you'd be lying in bed and there'd be a strange noise outside, and you'd kind of go to the window and have a look around, what's going on. There was another time when there was a bat, a bat got stuck in the house and it was flying around inside. It actually got stuck behind a mirror. So the mirror was kind of banging on the wall, like, you know, as if it was going to come off, like there was something behind it. And there was also a few things that happened again, which, you know, people who've read the book will kind of recognize this in a roundabout way. There's a funny rule, there's a law in France, and I can't quote it exactly, but it's something about if you've got a property that interrupts a thoroughfare, or that you know, that the public actually have right of way, they do have the right to walk across your property.
Yeah.
And because we were situated, there was a beach on one side, and then we had the headland, and then on the other side there was a public path. So every so often these random people would just walk through the garden, and I mean, you know, the people that we worked for were like, yeah, that happens all the time, try and chill about it. But there was this one time when I was down at the pool, and I looked over, and there was just a guy just standing in the garden, just looking at it. And there was another time when I was in the kitchen cooking, and I looked over, and there was a whole bunch of school children and their teacher just walking through the property, you know. And we had animals and stuff. So for these children, it was like it was a petting zoo. They were being taken on an excursion to a petting zoo, and they were walking around, and I was like, no, this is private property. You have to leave. What's going on? And it was that there were certain things that just really stuck with me and really made me think anything could happen in a place like that. And it was just the most extraordinary, surreal experience in so many ways.
Well, we're all really glad you had that experience, because a really wonderful book was born out of that experience. And, you know, it is an absolute page turner. So I suggest everyone out there in Booktopia TV land goes and buys it this evening. Order it on Booktopia.
Well done. That's a great way to wrap up. And yeah, exactly. You can order both The Safe Place and The Second Son from booktopia.com.au. Thank you so much for joining us for our lovely, comfortable chat. I've had such a lovely time talking to you, Loraine. It's always such a pleasure.
Me too.
And I hope we get the opportunity to do it again. And best of luck with all future sales of The Second Son. It's absolutely brilliant. I really hope that the story gets into as many readers' hands as possible.
Thank you so much, Anna. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you again. It's just always a delight, and yay for us.
Yay! Woohoo! Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.